Welcome to Masters of Self University podcast, your highest source of sacred truths and universal wisdom. Hello, beautiful souls. I'm Rachel Fiori, mystic, spiritual teacher, psychic healer, and founder of Masters of Self University. Join our journey of soul transformation as we deep dive into this latest episode. Hello, beautiful souls, mystical beings. Thank you for listening into Masters of Self University podcast. I'm Rachel Fiori, your host for this episode. So, I want to dive into why being vulnerable in your relationship backfires. So, in our couples coaching program and the coaching I've done for decades now, a couple of decades now, I have seen this one massively, like almost across the board. It is so common where we fall into this trap where we learn in the world, people in the world teach you in so many different ways, be more open, be more vulnerable, be more open, be more vulnerable, except that we've learned that our defense mechanisms, we need to be kept safe. We need to be safe. We don't feel safe, so I'm not open and vulnerable. And then if I'm open and vulnerable, then that's where we fall into the trap. Like, I can't be open and vulnerable, but everybody tells you, be open, be vulnerable. Well, we're not gaining the proper education in what it actually means to be open and vulnerable, number one. And here's why it backfires then when you are. So let me give you an example that is pretty common. So you decide to be open, to be vulnerable, to take some ownership, to tell your partner, your spouse, to share how you feel, to share, maybe your fears or your insecurities, or this is how I'm feeling right now. And look at me, I'm opening up and I'm actually sharing my feelings. Okay. And then your spouse, your partner doesn't react in the way that you expect them to. Well, wait a minute. I'm just open and vulnerable. Aren't you then supposed to emotionally support me, love me, tell me this is great, hug me, hold me? Isn't this supposed to create magic and there's no more conflict? That's the trap. That's why being vulnerable in your relationship backfires. We don't understand what it really means to be vulnerable, number one. And number two, we have an expectation attached to it that if I'm like this, you then have to be like that. Okay. So I'm going to give you one example. Here's where we're going to start. Just because you're sharing how you feel doesn't mean you're not coming from wounding and you're not projecting your wounds onto your partner. That's not always the case, but that's still sometimes the case. We haven't yet learned, elevated enough to be able to not come from wounding. And what happens a lot of times when we quote unquote are vulnerable and share our feelings with our partner, we're actually still projecting our own wounds onto our partner. So, for example, I just, you're really hurting me. I just feel like it's such an attack. It's so offensive when you say or do blah, blah, blah. Meanwhile, what's happening is that isn't the truth, the universal way of truth. What's happening is you're actually showing up in victim consciousness, in codependency, trying to force, without realizing it usually, trying to force your spouse to be your mommy or your daddy. You're showing up as a child. So it doesn't make your emotions wrong or bad. Your emotions are what they are, but it doesn't make your emotions accurate in understanding the whole scenario. This is where the way of truth comes in. It isn't about simply being vulnerable enough to share. I just feel like you're always putting me down and you're always criticizing me and I'm never good enough and nothing I ever do is good enough for you. I was open and vulnerable and now you're supposed to make me feel better about that. You're supposed to love me and support me now in this way so I don't feel bad anymore. There, I was open and vulnerable. Now, is my relationship magically healed? No fucking way. Just no way. Now, because as I stick with this particular example, no matter what I do, it's never good enough. I can never make you happy. Meh. When we're coming from that, and if we share that thinking, I do so much for you and I don't feel appreciated. Look at me. I'm being open. I'm being vulnerable. I am vulnerably sharing right now. And then somehow you're supposed to tell me exactly what I want to hear. Oh, you're right. Oh my God, I don't appreciate you. You're so amazing and wonderful. And no, we're just creating more dysfunction. The reason is it's okay that you feel the way that you feel. It doesn't make it accurate. Your wounding of not being seen, not being validated, 99% of the time was created in childhood by default, simply by the way your parents parented you. It doesn't mean you had to have terrible, abusive, or horrific parents either, by the way. They were human. They were not enlightened. They fucked you up in some way. These are how all programs are created. Period. End. From the way we were raised, from the way we were parented, from culture and society, from our traumas. Period. Fucking end. That's how these energetic programs that influence our behavior, that influence our personality, that's how they are created. So our relationships are in conflict. Things are happening. We want our relationships to be healthier. We want our marriages to be healthier and secure and safe and stable and all the things, right? We want to have true partners and teammates and feel emotionally supported and all the things in our relationship. So then you learn out there, we need to be more vulnerable. We need to be more vulnerable. Men, especially with everything coming out, trying to help men, all the people that are trying to help men and trying to teach men, open up and be more vulnerable. But I'm here to tell you there's a trap because that's not all there is to it. And if that's all you're learning and that's all you're attempting to do, okay, let me be more vulnerable. I know as a man that I've been told a million times, coaching, therapy, whatever, I hear it constantly. Men aren't vulnerable enough. I'm going to be more vulnerable. And then your wife, your partner, whatever, you're vulnerable and they don't respond in the way that you expect or you want. And you're like, well, I was vulnerable. They're wrong. Bleh. It's not safe. Not accurate. There's many layers to this that we have to learn and grow and evolve out of our programming, and not to mention understand our programming and our wounding, how deep it goes and how many layers there are. It is not cookie cutter, black and white, just be more vulnerable and things will be great. Your relationships will heal. That's a load of crap. Because a lot of times, and this is especially for men, because of the way patriarchy is, it teaches you to criticize each other, put each other down. So a lot of people grow up with teasing each other, making fun of each other. There's that competition crap. So when you're vulnerable, you get made fun of. You get picked on more. Okay, so that's often the case. So it's like, no, you're not just going to open up to your buddies suddenly and be more vulnerable one day. If you're opening yourself up to attack, right? In your relationship, if you're not typically opening and vulnerable, it doesn't automatically mean that if and when you do, you're suddenly everything's going to be softer and in harmony and your relationship's going to heal. No, there are many more factors that come into play that you need to educate yourselves in order to understand what is actually going on here. It's never as simple as just be more vulnerable. What the hell? Don't do that. Don't do that. It isn't healing. And oftentimes, I'm going to give you this example again. Oftentimes, what we're actually doing, because we haven't received this elevated level of education and what's really going on in our relationships, we are doing nothing but projecting. But you don't appreciate me, and I feel blah, blah, blah. I feel used. I feel taken advantage of. I feel like, okay, great that that's how you feel. What programs are you running? How old are you right now? What wound is being activated by your perception, and 99% of the time, misperception of what's going on? That's the work. Okay. Being vulnerable also means that if I'm going to be open and honest, the way of truth, Okay. That quote unquote vulnerability, that is me choosing to be a divine person. And that means if I'm accurately, authentically vulnerable, what is not included in vulnerability is me projecting my wounds and my programs onto you. That's not vulnerability. That's projection. That's manipulation. Now we see why vulnerability backfires in your relationship. Because a lot of times we think we're being vulnerable, we are actually being manipulative. We are doing nothing but projecting our shit onto our partner, expecting him or her to then show up in a way that we want them to show up as. No wonder it backfires. I'm going to give you another example of what happens. Here's a different example. If you have been in your relationship extremely emotionally unsafe, you're not an emotionally safe person in your relationship. You haven't been an emotionally safe, supportive, healthy, husband or wife. Okay. And if your track record is you're not emotionally safe, you haven't been an emotionally safe partner, you don't know what that means, you don't know how, right? And you have lacked that in your relationship, and then suddenly you're choosing to heal and elevate, and you then are vulnerable with your partner, with your spouse about something. And they don't have the warm and fuzzies when you are. I want you to understand what's happening. So a lot of times what's happening, wait a minute, I was honest, I was vulnerable, and I got a negative reaction from my partner. Yeah. Yep. Why? Because your track record sucks. You can't do years of dysfunction, behavioral programs that are unloving, emotional programs that are unloving, that are detrimental emotionally, and suddenly one day start to be a little bit more vulnerable and think that erases the track record that you have. It doesn't. You're not safe just because in this moment you decided to be a safe, vulnerable person with your spouse for once. Because guess what? You're a liar and a manipulator if they don't respond well or the way you expect them to. And then you go right back to a pattern of, see, I can't do anything right. See, I'm vulnerable and it doesn't work. See, you were faking it the whole time. You don't even realize it. You're full of shit the whole time. You don't even realize it. If you are changing and elevating and healing for real, then it means I'm going to show up in a safe way for me emotionally, a safe way for my spouse emotionally, period, fucking end. Because I am choosing to elevate and connect to my divinity so that I show up as a divine being in my relationship. Period, end. There is zero, and I mean zero attachment to how your partner responds to that. If you have been the one that has broken trust, you are a lack of emotional safety, and however you've been showing up for years in your partnership, if you're the one that has been creating that in the relationship, okay, and I'm not saying that your partner didn't create any of it too, you are only responsible for you. You control you, not your partner. So it's about you, okay? And if you've lacked emotional safety and stability, you've lacked harmlessness and gentleness in the past, then guess what? You've lacked compassion, the way of compassion. And suddenly you're showing up in a more loving way, in a harmlessness and gentleness kind of way. Those are those universal ways of oneness. You're showing up with more compassion, with more patience, universal ways of oneness. As you're showing up in these ways and you're starting to show up as more of a divine person with your spouse, there is zero attachment. I don't show up in my divinity in order for you to praise me, validate me, acknowledge me, have sex with me. Because if that is why I'm doing it, I'm a manipulative, fucking low level of consciousness asshole, man or woman. Do you understand? And you can't be trusted because you're a manipulator. That is not fucking healthy. You're not being vulnerable. You're being a fucking manipulator. Wake up to the programs that we've been conditioned to run that distort and sabotage our relationships. Got to wake up to it so that we can no longer show up as that. If we see the truth, the way of truth, if we see the truth, oh my God, yeah, there's a part of me that's doing this because I just want it to be more peaceful. How about I'm doing this so that I can become more peaceful? There is a difference. I am doing this so that I am a more mature and loving person, period, end. I'm showing up this way so that I am a person that becomes and shows up as the way of compassion, the way of connection, that enlightened divine definition. I'm showing up because that's who I am, period. It isn't so that I get something different, so I get another outcome, so that I get you to behave differently towards me. That's selfish manipulation. That is not divinity. That is not showing up and becoming the universal ways of oneness. I'm showing up out of compassion because I'm becoming compassion, period, end. I'm showing up as unconditional love because I'm transforming into the being of the way of unconditional love. And therefore, that's how I show up in life, period, end. It isn't about whether you give it back to me. It isn't about so that you'll do something different than you are. That's selfish manipulation. It's superficial. It's fake. It's inauthentic. I am doing it to get something out of you. Selfishness, manipulation. Do you see it? I show up as the ways. I show up as divinity because I am divinity, period, end. I am the universal ways of oneness. So I show up as them because it's what I am. I am what I am. It isn't about anything else in life. I don't show up this way so that I make more money. I don't show up this way so that you'll have sex with me more. I don't show up this way so that you'll be nicer. I show up this way because I am what I am, and this is what I am. You see it? As subtle as it may seem, the difference, they are worlds apart. So when I choose to heal and elevate myself and I show up in a vulnerable way, what does that mean? Vulnerability means as the way of truth. Vulnerability in a divine enlightened definition means as the way of trust. Vulnerability means as the way of honoring myself and everyone involved here. If I'm honoring of myself, I am honoring of my spouse, my partner, then I'm not projecting programs, am I? I'm not projecting my wounds and expecting my partner to heal my wounds or lick my wounds for me because I'm so helpless and powerless and incapable of doing it myself. That's not vulnerability. Vulnerability isn't weakness, it's power. That if I show up in a more loving way than I have in the past, if I show up in an emotionally safe way, the way of harmlessness and gentleness, if I show up as that because I'm evolving, I'm healing, I'm transforming myself from the inside out, I'm elevating and becoming an enlightened person, what it means to be truly mystical. That is the magic of life. That is the magical being that I am when I show up in this way. Vulnerability is power, divine power. That means that as I show up in vulnerability, which is the way of trust, the way of truth, the way of honoring, the way of compassion. Okay. When I show up like that, it doesn't matter an outcome. It doesn't matter how you take that. You may actually shut down, close down. Your heart might close. If I was that person, the example I gave a few minutes ago, if I was that person that's been unsafe in the relationship, I'm suddenly showing up. That can't yet be trusted. You don't flip a switch and your track record is suddenly gone. It's not how it works. You've established the track record. You've already established you can't be trusted emotionally, that you're unsafe emotionally. Okay. And so, because of that, if you start to show up in a more vulnerable way, that means if your partner's like, okay, and they actually close down and pull away from that, and then you're like, see, doesn't work. Well, how old are you? Grow the fuck up. You're not divine. You were a manipulator getting what you wanted out of it in detachment, remember? Your partner doesn't necessarily know if this is fake. And guess what? If you have a negative reaction to their negative reaction, it was fucking fake. So there you just proved you can't be trusted. You just proved you are not harmlessness and gentleness. That's what you've just shown your partner. And then it's going to take a lot longer to heal that. You just took 10 steps backwards in your relationship. You show up that way to show up that way because that's what you are becoming. Period, end. It ends there. That's it. That's divine. That's a reflection of becoming the universal ways of oneness. Okay, if you haven't bought your copy yet of the 20 Universal Ways of Oneness, get it on Amazon, please, so that you understand more deeply what these ways are and how to become them. Okay, that is our responsibility, which is the first way of oneness. It's my responsibility to show up as the rest of the ways of oneness. Especially if I'm in a marriage, in a partnership, in a relationship. Are you kidding me? How dare you connect from wounding and programming? That's not love, right? So, if you are showing up in these ways genuinely, and you're more vulnerable, that means divinely powerful. What does that mean? That your partner, if you have a track record of not being safe, you've been untrustworthy emotionally, okay, with all your defensiveness or how much you attack or how much you criticize or walk out of the room and do the abandonment programs when your partner's vulnerable and trying to share to you and you just leave. I can't handle this. You're too emotional. All that fucking bullshit that we do that destroys relationships. And suddenly you're being vulnerable now. And then you expect them to be supportive and nurturing to you when you haven't been to your partner? You think your partner's just going to jump in and jump on board all of a sudden? No. So we learn with teachings of oneness consciousness, I show up for you when you're sharing, when you're upset, when you're vulnerable. I'm also vulnerable. What does that mean? It means that I connect the way of connection to my divine power. I connect, I become the way of presence. I actively listen. I don't interrupt. I don't talk over. I don't give you fucking advice. I don't fix anything. There's nothing to fix. You're sharing with me to connect with me. I'm mature emotionally, mentally, and spiritually mature enough now. Did I mention emotionally mature enough now? To sit and listen with an open heart just so that I can understand what's going on and where you're coming from. And that means in the way of presence, shutting up. You can't understand where someone's coming from if you're constantly interrupting them, if you're constantly changing the subject, if you're constantly telling them how to fix it, if you're constantly asking more questions. Shut the fuck up. Everything you need to know, probably they're going to tell you if you just shut up and listen long enough to understand why they're in pain. Why are they frustrated? Why are they upset? Understanding it, clearly understanding it, is becoming the way of presence. And then when they're done sharing, if you need a question for clarification, or you need to, okay, this is what I understand. Please tell me if I'm accurate, if I get this right, if I'm getting this right. That's when you can start to gain some clarity if you need it. Okay. If you are genuinely showing up as the way of presence, that's part of being vulnerable. That's part of what vulnerability is. I am sitting, I am listening, I'm understanding, I am quiet while I'm listening to all of this. Okay. And then if I need to, I gain a little bit of clarity. All right. Vulnerability isn't just sharing about yourself. Vulnerability is being able to be emotionally supportive to another when what they're sharing has something to do with you or not, but especially if it has something to do with you. All right. When somebody is sharing with you, when your spouse or partner is sharing with you, here's what I'm upset about. Here's what I'm frustrated about. And all you do is get defensive and attack, defending yourself. You're attacking me. I'm never good enough. How old are you? You're showing up as a child. Healthy, powerful relationships are able to move through conflict when you're doing something that is actually really hurtful and negative to me and in this relationship. You are negatively impacting the relationship. And that doesn't come from my wounding, my misperceptions because of my fucked up dysfunctional programming. You are actually showing up in an unhealthy way or an immature way, or you are actually projecting your inner child and showing up as a teenager or a toddler instead of a mature adult. And that needs to be addressed in the relationship. And it should be safe enough to address it and bring it up in the relationship, period, end. Going to go back one more time again to if you were the one with the poor track record of being safe, emotionally safe in the relationship, and you're suddenly starting to be vulnerable for once, your partner might shrink down and close down. I've mentioned this already, but why? Because you haven't proven that you are emotionally trustworthy. That's why. Emotional trust is one of the most complicated and hardest wounds to heal when you have shattered emotional trust. Okay. And you cannot be 50% healed and then, hey, trust me already. No. If you have broken or shattered or proven that emotionally you are not trustworthy, which means I'm not safe with you emotionally. If I share what I'm upset about and then you get defensive or you storm out, you're not fucking safe. Or you attack me or you gaslight me and turn it around. Oh, but what about what you do? You fucking gaslighter. That's deflection. You're an immature little brat. You're not even mature enough to be in a romantic relationship and you shouldn't be in one. And yet these are the most common programs people run in their relationships. It's insane. You've proven you're not trustworthy emotionally. And then you show up a little more vulnerable and then you expect your partner to be like, oh my God, I've been waiting for this forever. Yay. Yay. It's harmonious now. No, it's okay. I'm waiting for you to fucking gas. Oh, you did it once. Waiting for you to gaslight me again. When's the shoe going to drop kind of thing? And don't you dare go into immaturity. Well, that's not fair. Yes, it is. You're the one that created that. These are the consequences of what you've done in the relationship. You created this in your relationship, period, end. You have to mature enough to see what you have actually created. And then here we become the mystical warriors because now, oh, wow, I've created all of this. I've created such a lack of trust and lack of safety. I've created that. So in order to heal that and transform that and elevate out of that and create a whole new energetic matrix, a new healthy ways of oneness matrix in my family dynamic, in my relationship dynamic, I have to completely change everything about myself that ran all of those old, ugly, unloving, dysfunctional, unhealthy, selfish programming, wounds that need to be healed. Guess what? Heal them all. Healing a little bit or 50%, guess what? It isn't fucking good enough. That's not healed. That's in the process of healing. So you might be on the right path. Good for you. I applaud you. Awesome. That's wonderful. You don't get an excuse. Well, I'm better today than I was 6 months ago. Isn't that good enough? No, it isn't. If you're not fully healed yet, it isn't fucking good enough. Get out of your inner child wanting so much praise and credit for how far you've come. Grow the fuck up. And you're going to call that vulnerability in your relationship when all you are still is this broken, powerless, unhealed child who just wants your spouse to praise you and acknowledge how far you've come and how wonderful you are now compared to you were before. Listen to how that sounds. You're still a fucking child. That's an immature child. That's not a criticism. It is time to wake up to the truth of how we are actually showing up in our relationships so that we can actually heal it once and for all. I'm here to help you by giving you this level of education. It's never a judgment. Never, ever, ever. Never is there a judgment. It's seeing the truth so we can transform it. So if I am truly elevating into my divinity, I change because change is needed, period, fucking end. If you are in a relationship where there's a lot of unhealthy interactions or conflicts or dysfunction, first of all, please go to mastersofselfuniversity.com. I mean this so literally. Please go to mastersofselfuniversity.com and sign up for a free consultation so that you can learn about everything that we offer in our relationship coaching programs, okay? Because this is the stuff that we teach step by step in our relationship coaching programs so that we can help you step by step heal all of this, see what's really there so that we can actually heal it for real once and for all permanently. Okay, that's what we do. This is what we are experts in. So please reach out and get the help that you need if this is you in your relationship to whatever degree. All right. But outside of that, when you really see what's going on and you understand, okay, so this is what I've been creating in my relationship so far, and change is needed, isn't it? Change is needed. Absolutely. I'm going to be the change that is needed. You know that beautiful saying from Gandhi, be the change you wish to see in the world? I hope you have a better, deeper understanding of what that actually means. Be the change you wish to see. Oh, if you could just feel the level of truth of that beautiful statement. Because you cannot change anything in the world if you yourself do not change. So if change is needed in this relationship, this isn't about saying, you know, my husband, my partner, my wife, whatever, they have so much to heal. They have so much to change. They need to change. That could absolutely be truth. And it probably is. Okay. So that could be truth. However, it doesn't matter because the dynamic between you and I right now still requires change. But he needs to change because he's mostly the problem. But she needs to change because she's mostly the problem. That could even be true. It could. I've mentioned this in podcasts before, and I certainly mention it in coaching with certain clients. Sometimes 80% of the problem or 90% of the problem really truly is one spouse, one partner. That is not always true, and it's not that common. So don't get excited. Some of you are like, oh, I knew it was all my partner's fault. Don't get too excited. However, can that be absolutely true? That one partner really is almost completely the problem. Okay. Yeah, that is a possibility. It really, unfortunately, it really is. So whatever the scenario is for you, I just want you to understand this. No matter how much programming wounding you have to heal versus me, okay, no matter how little or how much I have to heal, you have to heal. There is the way of truth is change, energetic transformation. Change needs to happen in this relationship between you and myself. Period. End. That is the way of truth, right? Because of that, when change needs to happen, it doesn't make it false or inaccurate or not true any longer that you have a tremendous amount of healing you need to do. You need to grow up a lot in this relationship. You might need to do that. But your dynamic with me, my dynamic with you, is what allows this relationship to continue to be stuck in a hamster wheel where it's at. So bottom line is, because I know change needs to happen, be the change you wish to see in your relationship. I need to figure out, with professional help and guidance, I need to figure out how I need to change. It doesn't mean you don't need to change, and it doesn't mean this is my fault that we're here. It's not about that. Stop with blaming. It's simply, I need to change, so I'm going to change. Okay, let me give you a real simple, silly example so this can click better for some of you. If you walk into your living room right now and there's shit everywhere, toys everywhere, dog toys, kids' toys. You might not have kids, that's fine, but there's blankets and shoes and shit everywhere. It is a mess. And you walk into the living room. Can you easily stand there and say, what needs to change in this living room in order for it to be clean? Easy to figure that out. You have eyes, you can see what the problem is. And so you fold the blankets, you clean up the toys, you clean up the dog stuff, you clean up everything that is out of place and you organize it. Boom, you have a nice clean living room for everybody to enjoy. Okay. You can see something needs to be done in this moment in order for the living room to be clean. Now, I know that's a very silly example. It's easy to understand. Well, yeah, you fold the blankets and you put the shoes away and you, AKA, clean the living room, right? You organize it and clean and put stuff away. Now you have a clean living room. Oh, it needs to be vacuumed in here. Let's vacuum. Oh, I'm going to vacuum. Oh, look how clean it is now. See how easy that is? Okay. In your relationship, so let me go back to the living room. If I look at the living room and just say, well, it's a fucking mess. This sucks. Hate living in a mess. And then you walk out of the room, living room is still a mess. Okay. In your relationship, it doesn't mean that your partner doesn't need to heal, but I see the dysfunction. I see how unhealthy we are. Therefore, I am going to elevate and change. Because if I knew how to elevate out of this as it is, meaning as you are behaving the way you're behaving, if I knew how to elevate out of that dynamic, I would have done it by now. Let that sink in. It doesn't make you the one to blame or you wrong. Nobody's wrong. Nobody's right. It's just change needs to happen. As a divine being and powerful being, I'm going to create the change that is needed. Period. End. And that means for you to learn how to evolve way higher in order to change energetically the dynamic and get out of the hamster wheel that your partner sucks you into. That's what I want you to understand. Be the change. And it might be learning a much more powerful degree of detachment when it comes to certain things, learning how to set more powerful boundaries that you've learned in our brainwashing patriarchal culture. That patriarch teaches you domination, hierarchy, superiority, inferiority, and all the shit. You may have learned that setting boundaries in certain ways is cold-hearted and unloving. Fucking bullshit. Learn what it means to set a boundary in a loving, healthy way so you do not go into that hamster wheel with your partner anymore. And literally by not setting the boundary, you're choosing to be in dysfunction with your partner. Ooh, guess what? He or she isn't the only one that still needs to heal. You actually need to heal more, don't you? Because you're not powerful enough yet to set the boundary that needs to be set in this dynamic. You see it? So no matter who is quote unquote more to blame for the arguing and the fighting and what's going on in your relationship, if you are a divine being, you do whatever it takes to change and elevate and heal out of it. There's always a way out, a way upwards, a way to be more elevated that creates a different energetic paradigm between the two of you. If they're unwilling to do it, guess what? Are you unwilling to do it? You're just like them. And yet you're blaming them. I hope you get it. Go visit mastersofselfuniversity.com. Check out our consultations and give us a like, please. Share this out. Make sure you subscribe. And I will see you in the next episode. Thanks for listening, everybody.